Hello and good evening, all. I'm Nina Friedman, a proud graduate of the class of 1977 at Kenyon. Oh, and I hear some wonderful background noise, but that's okay. I have the privilege of welcoming you all to this inaugural Kenyon Women Giving Back event. I, along with a small and mighty group of women, have been behind the Zoom's curtain since the college celebrated 50 years of women at Kenyon, working with the Office of Alumni Engagement to find innovative, exciting, inspiring ways to begin to build a deeper connection, with Kenyon women across the generations. We're truly thrilled to have all of you joining us for this unique opportunity to recognize and celebrate the myriad ways Kenyon women give back. We so hope this series and other programs to come will inspire you to join us in whatever way you choose to give back. Now it is my personal pleasure and a true honor to introduce our moderator for this evening's conversation, Jerry Coleman Tucker, Kenyon class of 1974. Jerry brings her heart and dedication to Kenyon and to the women of Kenyon. She was among the first classes of women to graduate from the college, the first president of the Black Student Union. I think that's correct, Jerry. You'll have to let me know, and has been giving back daily through her leadership in a world of professional journalism. Jerry has been as much a mentor to me as I can only hope I was to her when we were paired at Kenyon as Board of Trustee buddies. Jerry, we are deeply grateful to have you here tonight, and the Zoom is yours.
Nina, thank you so much. You're always so gracious. I love you. Thank you everyone for coming tonight to hear this discussion. It promises to be wonderful and interesting and informative for all of us. It's my pleasure to serve as moderator for our conversation, and I hope that you hear little of me and a lot from our distinguished panelists who will be talking about nonprofits and the amazing roles that they're playing. Right now, you're going to be muted, but we don't want you to not ask questions. You're welcome to ask questions in the chat feature. We will do our best to get to those questions because we want to hear from you as well. As you think of them, just put them in, or at the end of our conversation, you can just raise your hand using the reactions feature in the Zoom. And now I'd like to kick things off by introducing our speakers and getting them to tell you a little bit about their background in the nonprofit world and how they're making a difference for the world. First, we have Anna Adler, class of 2006. She is the outreach manager at the National Federation of the Blind. Next up will be Sonia Pryor-Jones. She's the class of 1994, and she's the founder of a fairly new nonprofit called Mantles and Makers, and that is focused on technology and serving marginalized communities. And finally, we have Eliza Weinings Rossman, class of 1984. She's a Brooklynite, a proud Brooklynite, and her nonprofit is All in Brooklyn, and it focuses on philanthropy for the Brooklyn community. So they will tell you more about themselves and their work and their careers in the nonprofit world. So let's start with Anna. Anna, would you tell us a little bit about your career in the nonprofit world, how you're leading, and what brought you there?
Certainly. Thanks so much, Sherry, and good evening, everyone. I'm Anna Adler, class of 2006, and my career in nonprofits actually started with a passion for politics and advocacy for causes that I believed in. Like many of you, I'm sure, I wanted to be involved in making my community and the world a better place. And at Kenyon, I started getting involved in politics by registering voters, and I volunteered in Knox County during that, I guess, inauspicious presidential election of 2004. After Kenyon, I started working at the state level on justice-focused advocacy and community organizing. I did some work in New York and Colorado that I'm really proud of. And then through some twists and turns, I landed in Baltimore, where I am now at the more traditional nonprofit. The National Federation of the Blind is the transformative membership and advocacy organization of blind Americans. We work to raise expectations of blind Americans and provide greater opportunities through training programs, Braille education, career mentoring, and kind of local advocacy. The NFB emphasizes that being blind or low vision should not hold anyone back from living the life that they want. It's a mission-driven organization, and it's at the intersection of advocacy and philanthropy. And I have to say, working for the NFB has really pushed me to think in new ways. I used to say, I want to be a voice for the voiceless. But now the work that I try to do is empower people to use their voice to speak for themselves. So I guess that's enough for me for now. But I want to thank everyone for putting this together, and thanks to everyone for joining us. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other panelists. Gary, I think you're muted.
Sonia, you've had a long career in nonprofits and you have a new one. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your path.
Sure. Thanks, Jerry. And it's a pleasure to be here with the rest of the Kenyon community. My path really started right after Kenyon. I have spent the last 20 plus years working at the intersection of STEM education, philanthropy, and community development. The work that I most recently was focused on for the past 6 years was as the Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer for the FAB Foundation, where we were supporting communities through digital fabrication technologies. And a big passion that grew for me during that particular job was to see how we can do more for communities of color, specifically in the United States. While digital fabrication technologies have been around and relatively accessible for well over a decade now, there's still very few communities of color that are engaging in these technologies. And so my new nonprofit, Mantles and Makers, is really focused on not only supporting communities and having access to these technologies and tools, but also integrating them in the pre-existing networks of technologists that have the knowledge as well as some of the connections necessary to really take full advantage of these technologies. During my time at Kenyon, I really got engaged with lots of things outside of the classroom that really created a rounded experience for me. And it was after that experience that I decided I didn't want to go to law school, but instead I wanted to work in higher education and support young people the way I had been supported by some amazing faculty members and administrators at Kenyon. So I did start the first half of my career working in higher education as well, and then transition to a lot of innovative K-12 based school practices and opportunities that then led me to the FAB Foundation. And so I'm really excited to be here talking with you all about these adventures and hopefully getting you all excited about technology and the force for change that it can make in communities across the US. So thank you.
Eliza, you are the founder, creator of All in Brooklyn, but you've also had a long path through the worlds of nonprofits. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, hey, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Eliza Weinings, Rossman, class of '84, and I'm really happy to be here. And I'm clearly following some pretty impressive women as they talk about their own careers, so bear with me. I am first and foremost a social worker. However, within that degree, I was trained as a community organizer with an emphasis in gerontology. And I might say I was trained as a community organizer before Obama made it cool. But everything in my career has sort of flowed from that identity. But I do want to say that my love of the nonprofit world really started back at Kenyon, specifically working with people when my buddy Liz Honey Buckles, who's on this call, urged me to join her reading mail to the residents of a nursing home in Mount Vernon our senior year. I fell in love with the residents and the staff there, and I have to thank her for putting me on the path of an incredibly fulfilling lifetime in the nonprofit sector. So fast forward through social work jobs in the field of gerontology, in philanthropy, running a family foundation and consulting for other philanthropic entities, and then a stint in social work academia to 8 years ago when I founded All in Brooklyn, which is a women's giving circle in Brooklyn, New York. If you're not familiar with that model of philanthropy, giving circles operate by pooling member donations and giving it all away. And they come in all shapes and sizes and operate formally and informally, and they're proliferating all over the country with all sorts of attention from Gates and other big funders. Now that I've mentioned them, I'm sure you'll hear more about them in the future. Anyway, to start All in Brooklyn, I reached back to my old community organizing training, of course, but I also made use of my liberal arts education at Kenyon, which taught me, among many other things, how to make an impassioned argument and get people behind it. So you can see probably where this is going. What drives me is the knowledge in the power of numbers and how harnessing that power in the right way can lead towards affecting real change. So with All in Brooklyn, we know that we can do so much more together than we can alone, at the very least with our pooled dollars. So, and so far, All in Brooklyn has dispersed nearly $2 million in 8 years to nonprofits doing incredible work in Brooklyn under such terrible conditions. And just for a little context, Brooklyn is now tied with Chicago as the third largest city in the country. That was just in the New York Times yesterday. And at 20%, it has one of the highest poverty rates, with only Detroit and Philadelphia ahead of it. We all know that wealth is concentrated among the few, and I guess I'm passionate about trying to get it dispersed where it's needed. To that end, every year, we All in Brooklyn women donate as much as we can through grant making, but we also offer our skills where they're needed. We have lawyers and social workers and architects and artists and all sorts of women. And from time to time, we get requests that make use of our skills. And obviously with COVID and racism as the double pandemic, we're really seeing devastating effects on all ages everywhere in Brooklyn. So to sum it up, I think my driving passion continues to be galvanizing my community of women toward accessing and supporting nonprofits that are helping so many people in critical need. And I'm really grateful to be able to tell you guys about that. And I'm excited to hear more from the other panelists and to continue this conversation.
What I love most about what you all have said so far is that it's not just about money, but it's any way that you can contribute to making the world a better place. Tell me a little bit more, if you would, about why you gravitated towards nonprofits, because you can make a difference, maybe not as much a difference in other areas. Why the nonprofit world? What are the things that most attract you about being a not-for-profit organization? You want to start, Anna?
Sure, I can start. I think, it was an opportunity as a young college grad to kind of really get in and start doing work right away, kind of get my hands dirty. So it was a great thing for a young college grad. And, throughout the years, I may have made some choices that were, kind of influenced by socioeconomic and other gender role forces that maybe my colleagues have similar thoughts about. But I think it's a great opportunity because there's so much need to kind of get started quickly, jumpstart your career, start working directly in communities, start working directly on projects that you are passionate about.
When you say influenced by social economics, what do you mean?
Well, this is kind of going in a different direction. But, the fact is that nonprofits pay less often than the private sector. And I've kind of wondered to myself if I may have made different decisions about my career if I was the primary breadwinner in my family. And I think a lot of women might be in the same boat. And I think because of, that compensation disparity, the nonprofit sector probably misses out on a lot of talent, both for men and women. But, it's worked for me.
Eliza, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I'm interested in that, in what you just said, Anna, because I don't know, I did the same thing that Anna did when I graduated from college. I went directly into politics because I cared, and I was passionate, but I also, you know, I came from a traditional family, and it didn't occur to me that my role as a woman would be about killing it in business. It was the reason I went into the not-for-profit world, was because I felt that's where my skill set, working with people, encouraging people, helping people, traditional women's, right, a women's role. And I guess I feel sort of lucky that it was that actually happened, because I feel so fortunate to be in a position to help people. And I don't know. But I hear you about the lack of compensation in this world, and I'm hoping that, you know, that's part of the national conversation right now, and I'm really hoping it continues.
Sonia, thoughts?
Sure. I think for me, it had a lot to do with culture as well as familiarity. I really appreciate Anna's mention of the realities of, you know, the composition in the nonprofit sector, highly female, highly white female, to be quite more accurate. And I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, sort of the larger socio political realities that we all have to be a part of. But for me, I had the opportunity while I was in high school, as well as during my undergraduate years, to intern quite a bit. And so I interned both in the corporate and the nonprofit sector. And the culture that I experienced in the nonprofit sector just was a better fit for me. I didn't feel as compelled or as excited about some of the things that I was exposed to in the corporate internship experiences that I had. And so for me, the nonprofit culture just seemed like a better fit. I will also say to that, you know, looking back on that now, many years in, I also now understand that there are some real opportunities when you are in the corporate space to also make for change in terms of the nonprofit arena, right? The ability to write checks is a really important thing, right? And most nonprofits need those kinds of resources to be made available to them. But I thought, for me, that's where the excitement was, in many cases, to be on the ground floor, to be in community with people where the work you're doing every day truly is impacting their lives in a unique way, has been and continues to be extremely appealing to me.
Eliza, go ahead.
Can I just ask, Sonia, when you were in these internships, were they paid? How did that work for you?
Yes, I was in a program called Inroads when I was back at the end of high school and beginning of college. And then after that, that really opened up some other opportunities for me, including paid nonprofit internships.
One of the questions I had, because when I think of nonprofits, I think that the people who gravitate to them are very entrepreneurial. They are visionary. They're more socially focused. Is that a myth, or is that sort of true to your experience? And how did your Kenyon education affect you as you made your choices about what to do after college? Anyone can take it.
I would say for me, my Kenyon experience was pretty direct. I think I mentioned in my introduction that so much of what I experienced, and not just good things, right? Also struggle and challenges while at Kenyon, really impacted the way I thought about a career moving forward. When I was in high school, I attended a magnet high school that was focused on law and public service. So I was coming to Kenyon to study political science, to go to law school, right? And a number of things changed. My experiences outside of the classroom, some changes in my personal life as well. And those experiences outside of class, particularly as a Black female student at Kenyon, had a lot to do with me desiring to work in higher education and to support other students of color who may have been first generation college students or students attending PWIs like Kenyon. And so the first part of my career, I worked in higher education in those kinds of roles. And so it had a lot to do with my Kenyon experience. It was pretty direct.
Anyone else, Eliza, Anna?
I'll go ahead. Well, I kind of had a similar experience going into Kenyon from Sonia. You know, I thought maybe I would go to law school, but then as I got started working, you know, I realized it wasn't for me, and I found that being able to do work, you know, right out of college that I was inspired by felt good. Kind of to go back to your original question, I don't consider myself a visionary. You know, there's a lot of minutia involved and day-to-day activities. One of the things I appreciate about my Kenyon education is learning how to write. So on the fundraising side, it's all about storytelling. You know, we want to be able to convey those personal stories and make personal connections. So I write thousands of emails and other fundraising appeals every year. It's not particularly glamorous. I'm not really, you know, breaking any boundaries, but I definitely appreciate my Kenyon education when I had to write all those emails.
Yeah, I I think I was asleep until I until I got to Kenyon. And at Kenyon, I was an English major. And I think it taught me, I'm an organizer. I think of myself as a social worker and a community organizer. And what Kenyon taught me was how to write like Anna, how to write, and also to be open-minded, because I feel like at Kenyon, you're forced to confront other ways of thinking and doing things, which leads to flexibility and nimbleness, which is something that's really important and has been important to the way I've, you know, in starting a not-for-profit, the way I did it and tailoring it to Brooklyn specific and to 60 women who are all part of an effort. And I think that that's the importance of a liberal arts education. It makes you think through different lenses and create sort of nimble thinkers. So for me, that really empowered me to do what I do.
You said something that struck a chord with me, and it's the storytelling. As nonprofit leaders, you must have some amazing stories that talk about what makes your role so fulfilling working in this segment. Would you guys want to share? Does anyone have a story to share of how, as a nonprofit leader, you're making a difference?
Well, there are two. You asked two questions at the same time. How we're making a difference, and what. And the first part was what we've seen that's been so inspiring. Is that right, Jerry? I mean, I can just say that I have seen so many that's one of the exciting things about what I do is I've had the honor of meeting so many inspiring leaders in the not-for-profit world. Anywhere from people who are leading large not-for-profits who are taking money and giving it and doing the best work imaginable in communities that need it so badly, and then dealing with small nascent nonprofits that are starting up with budgets of $30,000, $40,000 and people who are giving their heart and soul into giving it back. And you wonder where these people find their energy, especially when so many of these, in my perspective, some of these leaders are struggling themselves in their own lives. So for me, it's been an honor and a privilege to be able to help support people who are really doing the hard work in Brooklyn. I get to support it, and I get to wrangle all these people to get access to these leaders, but really it's about the leaders in Brooklyn who are doing the work.
Any stories to share, Sonia or Anna?
I was just waiting for the loud vehicle to pass my window. I have a cracked window in the space I'm in. It gets really hot in here. But I was gonna say, you know, in many ways, Eliza has described my world, you know, between what it was 30 days ago and where I'm headed with the new nonprofit. And I think I would say something that's been most inspiring to me was something that I worked on in my last role with Fab Foundation, and that was galvanizing a group of national nonprofits that were all aligned around getting more digital fabrication and maker education in the hands of K-12 students. And we worked on a project where we were all, first of all, being trained ourselves in equity-based storytelling, and then utilizing that training to tap into the stories of people that worked within our organizations and people that we were serving. And what was extremely inspiring about that work for me was the process, right, in terms of some of the things we learned and took away from it. But I had the opportunity to interview an educator and a student, and so many of the things that I heard from them were very similar, right? And it had a lot to do with breaking down the boundaries of technology and its accessibility, particularly for women. The educator was a woman, the student was a young woman, and the kinds of things that they talked about in terms of some of the fears that tend to be in the back of our minds, and in the way that women are socialized when they think about technology, when they think about STEM, and how having access to these digital fabrication tools was breaking away those barriers. And that really inspired me, because I think so often we think, you know, someone who is well off into their 40s or 50s and someone who's, you know, 14 years old are having very different experiences. But it was, you know, one of those proof points that the experiences are not that different, and how important it is for us to be doing the work that we're doing around advancing how more people can have access to technology.
Eliza?
Sonia, I cannot wait to get with you after this to let you know that I know of a couple of not-for-profits in Brooklyn who are doing the kind of work you want to do, but in different ways. And it's so important to get these not-for-profits partnering. And so let's talk after this about some of these nonprofits.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm actually amazed at how many nonprofits there are in the world. Just doing a little bit of research for our conversation tonight, there are more than 1.3 million. And I'm like, you know, there was so much emphasis when I was in college on, you know, going to the corporate world, going to the academy, and I never heard people really talk about the nonprofit world. So it's very exciting to me to see what you all are doing. One question I had, though, is when you say nonprofits, most people think that profits don't matter, that metrics don't matter. And I think that's one of those myths that needs to be exploded. Can you talk a little bit about that area?
I don't mind jumping in here. Metrics definitely matter. You know, most nonprofits have a set of funders, right, that they're working with. And in those funding relationships, there are expectations that needles are going to move, that, you know, the programming you are using as an intervention, whatever it may be, is going to create some level of progress for the community that you're serving. And so I've seen scenarios in which people, you know, have funders and they don't meet a threshold, and they may not be funded anymore because of that. And then I've seen others exceed expectations, and, you know, funders be very excited about providing additional resources to support the cause. And so metrics are definitely a part of the agenda in the nonprofit sector, in my experience.
There are metrics and there are metrics. Let me just say that. It is heartbreaking to hear you say, you know, that a not-for-profit doesn't meet their goals or doesn't meet their metrics, and then they risk it not getting funded again. I hope that's not quite as rigid now as it has been in the past, because I think that we're all in philanthropy trying to look at, you know, look at it in the long haul. And if there are reasons why a not-for-profit might not make their metrics. And so we're trying to loosen those, at least at All in Brooklyn, we're trying to loosen that view and maybe not set up so many metrics, ask the not-for-profits to set up their own metrics and their own goals, and then we buy in and partner with those goals rather than setting them up for the not-for-profits.
And let me just say this, because I want to be careful that I'm not giving a bleak picture and and sharing a message that says, we've got these, cold-hearted funders, and if you don't meet this particular metric, they're just throwing you out the window. That is not the message I'm trying to send. But what I am saying is, just like corporations have specific metrics and things that they're reaching, their expectations, nonprofits aren't working in a kind of nilly-willy way where they're not setting goals and doing all that they can to reach those goals. And sometimes they are, tied to funding. And so I want to be careful that I'm not making funders sound cold-hearted, but having worked on the other side of this work as well, I would also say that there is only so much funding to go around. And so, in philanthropy, there is also the reality of, the board that foundation has to respond to, and its overall mission, and how that mission is being aligned with organizations and meeting its goals as well. So I think there are goals all around that are shared, but I think in good relationships, to what you were speaking to, Eliza, there is a partnership around a common mission. And so I think nonprofits also have to be careful around who they decide to partner with as their funders.
I agree with that.
Street, right? And so there's a lot more to this that's, I think, about relationship management, which, is both an art and a science.
I think it's really great to hear what you said, Eliza, about how the philanthropic community is kind of coming around. I get a lot of questions from donors asking, well, what % of your budget goes to overhead and administration? And some of the nonprofit, what are they? I guess rating organizations kind of perpetuate that by highlighting those percentages of fundraising and administrative costs, and rating organizations higher who have a smaller percentage. So I think that causes organizations to kind of chase very narrow program specific funding, which can really tie things up, and it's hard to grow as an organization if you're not investing in kind of the infrastructure that will help you expand. So I'm so pleased to hear you say that, Eliza.
Oh, good. Well, I'm happy to say that it is really in the mind's eye of philanthropy right now. It's in all sorts of journals you read, that it's called the infrastructure, not the it's the overhead myth, that organizations can do the work without overhead, and it's crazy. And I do think that foundations are starting to get, or philanthropists are starting to get wise to this. Thank goodness, because it's crazy to think that you can only fund a program without funding the salaries and the other necessary costs that go into making a program great. And so I'm happy to say that is really at the forefront. And I just want to say that we are a giving circle. We are not professional grant makers. I've been a professional grant maker in my past, so I'm helpful in this process, but we are 60 women who are constantly adding integrity to our process by reading and educating ourselves. But we're all about partnering with our community and making sure that our nonprofits they're the leaders, they're the ones who are doing the work, and we're there to support and partner with them. But we're also getting an education about philanthropy from what's going on in the philanthropic world.
Yeah,
We're coming out, maybe, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Jerry, your question has really raised a real dynamic that we don't often talk about, and that is this delicate dance between philanthropy and nonprofits, right? And what those relationships are like. And particularly in a moment in time where we're spending a lot of time thinking about and trying to change behavior as it relates to equity, there's also a power differential, right, between nonprofits and philanthropic organizations. And that's something, you know, that I think a Kenyon education equips you for as well, because there's the opportunity to really dissect the problem and be comfortable having the debate that needs to be had. That's a big, you know, part of my Kenyon experience. I really learned how to like stand my ground and follow it up with facts in a couple of classes. And so I think this ongoing conversation as it relates to the role that philanthropy plays in and with the nonprofit sector is a really important one as we shift the way we do our work and behave in this country.
Thank you for naming that, Sonia.
I love that you brought that up. And I think it takes us in the direction of my next question, because we're coming through a season that's been unlike any other in my lifetime, of the pandemic, of the racial and social injustice concerns that have been raised all of last year and into this year. We've exposed, we as a society have seen the inequity in new and different ways. So how are nonprofits kind of rising to meet that? And how is what you're saying about philanthropy kind of jiving with the nonprofit world? And anyone jump in on that?
I'll start. I think it's by giving more power to the people who need it more to do the work that they're doing. And as far as we're concerned, we are focused on just giving money and just giving as much money as we can and giving of our skill sets as much as we can, because we recognize that the situation is worse and is bad and getting worse. You know, when people talk about the double pandemic, that doesn't make sense to me. Racism has been around a long time. It's COVID that is the pandemic, and coupled with racism, with racism, it's just it has created catastrophic conditions in Brooklyn. And so, as far as our philanthropy is concerned, we are changing the way we do business to make it easier for nonprofits to ask for money from us and to use it in the way they need to best, without jumping through hoops and because we recognize that that conditions are bad. That's how we're responding.
Yeah, at the National Federation of the Blind, we, like everybody else, had to quickly shift all of our programs to be and events to be virtual. But it actually enabled us to connect with so many more people than we otherwise would have been able to do in in-person events. And we did see that the funding actually came pretty quickly for these new programs or shifted programs. So that was great. And now, you know, as we're kind of transitioning back to normal, we're thinking about how we can incorporate some of these lessons from the pandemic, thinking about how we can do hybrid events, but not overburden staff. So I think there's a lot of change happening, and you know, still a lot more work to do. And, you know, one of the things, one of the lessons kind of we learned over the past year as an organization was that it's not enough to just be a diverse organization. You know, we're an organization that encompasses membership from, you know, every walk of life, every kind of person can become blind. So I think we kind of hung our hat on that, but now we're being more intentional about the language that we use, how we incorporate discussion of intersecting characteristics into our programming and into our advocacy. So there's still a lot more to be done, and we're really being pushed by our membership and many of my colleagues. So it's really still happening, and there's been a lot of growth over the past year.
Yeah. Well, first, I would just like to say I appreciate Eliza's framing, right? What is the pandemic, and what, you know, has been, I guess, what I would call an epidemic, because it's been going on so long. And I think for me, and I'm speaking of, the role I was in as, I also shift and find myself in a new space. For me, I personally resisted, putting up Black Lives Matter on the websites and, putting out letters and notes without really the organizations that I was involved in doing the deep work to really understand if you're doing an assessment, right, on the spectrum that is, racism and forms of oppression, what does it really look like? Where do you really fall, right? And so the work that I was really excited about was the work of the national organizations coming together, because while we wanted to do something about the inequities about these technologies being in K-12 school environments, we knew we also needed to first put a mirror up to each of the organizations and better understand what are we doing right now, what are our current interventions, and where might they be problematic, right? Because we know racism happens at layers. And so, what's personal, what's cultural, what's societal, and what does that mean for your given organization? And that was really hard work, right? And really uncomfortable work. And I think organizations look different about a year and a half, 2 years later than they did before they started that work, and doing that work in a relatively public way, right? With other organizations that are similar in mission that maybe you even at one point thought of as a competitor. And so to be able to do that work together in that public way is really, really difficult. And so I was really excited about that, but not very excited about, some of the organizations putting up things on websites, and you just talked to a person who works there last week about what's really happening internally. And so there is so much more work to be done. From the philanthropic side, though, I've seen some really thoughtful things come out of philanthropy. Things like up here in Cleveland, where I live, they have something called the Black Futures Fund, which was started by the Cleveland Foundation. So very specifically a fund to support Black-led organizations that are serving Black people, which makes a lot of sense, but it is also a very political move, right? And also got some pushback. And so I am starting to see things like that happen in philanthropy, and I'm really excited to see those things grow and be sustained.
Where did that pushback come from, Sonia?
Just general press, right? When the announcements were made, there was, feedback from different people in different parts of the community. Well, why does it just have to be for Black people? What about? So that kind of pushback.
Got it.
This is a fascinating discussion, but I want to make sure we leave room for questions from our audience if there are questions.
I have a couple of questions that came into the chat, Jerry. One coming from Dana Whitley, class of 2002. She asked, can you talk about how you get your volunteer members engaged in your mission? People are pulled in so many directions today, it's difficult to get attention in your particular issue or mission. So volunteers.
Anna, did you wanna?
Go ahead.
I don't know if I have a great answer for that. It's always, always a struggle. I think it's kind of a numbers game. You have to ask a lot of people. You have to maybe spend a lot of time kind of nurturing those relationships, reaching back over and over again, giving people a lot of opportunities to do work that they feel comfortable with. Providing space for people to take a step back if, their work or family life necessitates it, and providing many different opportunities for people to participate. So, maybe someone really just wants to write a check and that's it, and that's okay. Or, maybe someone can't write a check, but can, help with thank you calls or something like that. So I think having kind of that grace and, giving a lot of space to your members and your volunteers helps a lot.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. I thought starting out saying it wasn't going to be a full answer. It was a good answer. I agree. Giving all sorts of opportunities to people to give, and even if it means writing a check, hey, that's good too. And just sort of being nimble, again, the Kenyon word, nimble about and flexible with people's interests and with people's abilities, and not getting your feelings hurt if people are turning the other way. And that's how you sort of keep people on the line.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It makes me think of, in the olden days, early in my career, I directed a family and community engagement program in a school. And that's the way we talked about parent volunteers, right? They needed to have a wide range of ways to be engaged, because every parent isn't available to show up and, you know, be the homeroom parent, but they might be able to make phone calls, or they might be able to pay for, you know, the next classroom party. And so giving people options. And I think, you know, you also have to be organized enough to know what are the range of things that you need in your organization.
So Jerry, we have another question, and Kate is going to challenge my French here with her last name. So it comes from Kate Molly Pengion, I am guessing, class of 84. She wants to know, can you clarify the difference between nonprofit and philanthropy?
Well, I think in this context, we're talking about not-for-profits, meaning the charities that are doing the work. You know, any charity and philanthropies are charities that are giving the money to the charities to do the work. Do you think that Sonia, do you have anything to add to that?
That sounds
But
good.
it is confusing. It is confusing because the word charity is that can be confused with donations, when in fact a charity is specifically, in this context, a not-for-profit doing the work. Thank you.
Eliza, your giving circle, though, is both, right?
You know, interesting you should say that. It is a little bit of both, because not only do we give the money, but we also give, if we have a skill set that a not-for-profit needs and specifically asks for, we try to accommodate. But again, I don't want to take any spotlight away from the people from the not-for-profits in the community who are really doing the work. So I would say, yes, we do some work in that way, but we're really primarily partnering by way of giving resources to not-for-profits so that they can do the work that they're doing, that they do best. Does that answer your question, Jerry?
It does. My next question, do we have other questions in the chat right now?
I think that's it. If anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand or post it in the chat.
So I was curious about the missions that you're attracted to, because you went from the fab house to the mantles and makers. Why did you make the shift to the technology area? How did you define your mission, Sonia?
Yeah, and so I'm an educator. So my undergraduate degree was international studies and history. That's what I did at Kenyon. But I went on to get a master's degree in education, specifically adult learning and development. But somehow I keep getting pulled into K-12 innovation. Having said that, for me, I was a first generation college student, right? So much of it goes back to my own personal experience. And so I've always been interested in education related nonprofit work. And so for me, the technology is just an extension of education. It is the way in which, and the content in which, that I believe young people need to learn in order to have a quality education and to engage in society at its fullest. And so the work at Fab Foundation was focused specifically on democratizing digital fabrication. The work at Mantles and Makers, it's a part of that, but it's more specifically centering communities of color. And more specifically thinking about not only the access to the technology, but also the human capital that needs to go along with it for people to maximize use.
Sonia, is it going to be, is your new nonprofit going to be national, or is it specific to Cleveland, or how are you doing that?
Yes, I just had this conversation with another great Kenyon woman earlier today. And so the work it's a national nonprofit. Our demonstration project is actually called Fab House, and that is a community-based makerspace in Cleveland. But the work of Mantles and Makers is national.
We'll bring another demonstration project to Brooklyn.
If you help me raise the money, we will do it.
Our time is getting close, and I wanted to ask you guys to put on your future hats and talk about what's coming, what's new, what's the world ahead for nonprofits.
I love that question.
You want to go ahead, Sonia?
Answer it, Sonia.
It's more of a wonder than an answer, right? And for me, I wonder, so when I think about the history of nonprofits, right? A lot of, the nonprofit sector, philanthropy started because there was enormous wealth being built in the United States, right? And so I would love to see the next version, right? The next iteration of that, where wealth has been built in such an equitable way that nonprofits and philanthropy as we know it will forever be changed. And I have no idea what that looks like. I feel like I have to go to a 1-year-old or a first grader to find out what that looks like. But that is my wish, that there will be so much, wealth creation that's distributed in an equitable way that it looks really different from what it looks now.
Wow.
Oh, God.
Wow.
Yes.
I love the answer.
And let me
that
take it
answer.
from there. My wish is for that, and for philanthropy to somehow figure out the way that the power dynamic shifts, so that I keep using the term partnership because I keep saying partnership because that's what I think is going to work in the future, is if philanthropy truly partners with the not-for-profit community, and we somehow figure out ways to diminish the power between the power structure between them. That's what we're working toward now, and that's not just what All in Brooklyn is working toward. That is in the philanthropic, that is in the ethosphere right now. And I really hope it comes to be.
Yeah, I
Anna,
love
do you
that.
have anything to add?
Not much. I just want to, I guess, echo what everyone said. It would be great if we didn't need Feeding America or local housing nonprofits. There's plenty of other problems to solve, and it would be great, if nonprofits could partner with corporations and other government entities to help solve those problems. There's a lot more to do.
So before we close out things, are there any comments that you want to make, that any areas that we didn't really cover that you think we should have brought up tonight?
I think this is a great beginning, Jerry, and I see lots of future conversations coming from this one. I'm really excited to be a part of them, and joining them and listening and asking questions and moving in this direction of how Kenyon women give back. I think I think we covered a lot actually in this first night. I loved hearing what everybody had to say.
I agree with that. And I would love, It's funny because I'm thinking about metrics again, but in a more positive way, a positive spin on metrics. I would love to see, all of the amazing things that Kenyan women are doing in the world, because I imagine this is a very small representation of that. And so, Nina, I'm staring at your screen. If there is a way through this work or the board work, we can figure out how to collect as many of those stories as possible and share them, I think that could be pretty powerful. I know I would be inspired, and folks working in nonprofits, they need inspiration to keep going some days. So thank you all for this.
Well, I just want to thank you all for this amazing conversation. And I want to turn this back over to Nina, who started us off on such a high note, just to close us out and give us any parting thoughts. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jerry. You're muted, Nina.
Maybe my family did that. That could be a family thing. Mute mom. Thank you all so much. I feel like, Sonia, from your last words, and to all four of you for this, all your words, it was a fantastic conversation, and it's making me think about turning thought into action in so many ways. So, Jerry, I cannot thank you enough for letting me call you and asking you to do this inaugural moderating job, so to speak. And I hope it was a pleasure and not a worry. And to Anna and Sonia and Eliza, your work is so inspiring. You've enlightened us, you've informed us, you've left us with a lot of thought for more conversation, true food for thought as we move forward to Thanksgiving. We know Kenyan women played a critical role in our alma mater's history, and clearly, listening tonight, we will continue to make a significant impact on its future. So on behalf of myself and the Kenyon Women Giving Back leadership team, we really thank you so much for joining us tonight to begin the conversation. We are going to continue this series virtually on, I hear, Tuesday, the 22nd of March. So star that on your calendars, please, at 7 p.m. And we're also planning, which is the joy, hope, and prayers for us all, to be in person and have an event during reunion weekend, which is Memorial Day weekend, May 27th, 28th, on that magic mountain. I would always like to add that the most important thing is to keep supporting each other, staying healthy and staying well. We would love your feedback on this event, always suggestions for future event topics and ideas, and how to continue to engage one another. I'm told, of course, that our wonderful colleagues on the professional side will follow up with an email, but my follow-up tonight is to wish you only good things, to be grateful for all that we have. And listening tonight, we will continue to give back in whatever ways we can. So a healthy and happy holiday season. And thanks again, and a huge congratulations to all for a great night. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Nina. Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night. Have a good holiday. Thanksgiving coming up. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.